Well, I do believe in miracles, and I'll tell you why. Because you all knew that I was the speaker right after lunch, and you came back anyway, and I'm deeply grateful for that. It is a delight to be with all of you today, and I want to say thank you. I also want to tell you how much I admire you. Anybody that will listen to 14 different political speeches in a row, proof positive that there is a certain level of extraordinary patience and long-suffering with Jewish people, and you've proven that here today. I'm a Baptist, and I would never last that long, I can tell you right now. Well, as Lynn mentioned, I've been to Israel, and I don't want to say this like more than any other candidate, as if that somehow qualifies me to be an expert, qualifies me to be an advocate. But I am an advocate precisely because I have been someone who has gone to Israel for the past 42 years. My trips to Israel didn't start I thought for a moment there it was going to be the definition of one-hand clapping. But my interest in Israel, my relationship with Israel, is not something that happened as a result of my running for office and feeling that I somehow had to appeal to a segment of the Republican audience that would be very happy that I was a supporter of Israel. It happened quite naturally. At the age of 17, just a month before my 18th birthday, a gentleman who was to become my college roommate in 2 months and I went to the Middle East, and we traveled all over the Middle East, places that I probably couldn't and wouldn't go today. Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and Israel. And when I went to Israel, something happened inside of me that I can't explain, but you'll understand it. And that is, it's a place I'd never been in my life, but I felt like I was at home. Now, keep in mind, in 1973, the modern Israel was 25 years old. It was a struggling little country that, frankly, was still trying to get up on its feet. Its economy was tough. Many of the people lived in the kibbutzim. Very few people had a real sense that it would be what it is today in terms of the economic and technological powerhouse that it is. Israel's economy was largely selling some oranges and bringing some tourists over. But it was very evident that the pioneer spirit that existed in that nation was as close to anything that resembled the American spirit that I had ever witnessed, for sure. And I realized from that point on that the United States and Israel don't merely have an organizational relationship because we have mutual interest. We have an organic relationship because both of our countries were founded by people who had the vision to give their children and their future generations something of liberty and of freedom, and to give them the ability to have religious liberty so that their beliefs would not be trampled out by voices of tyranny. But there is something else about Israel that I believe mirrors that of the history of the United States. I do not believe that it is possible to understand, to even comprehend the United States of America without believing that it involved the providence of God. And I do not believe that it is possible for anybody to look at the remarkable, stunning history, not only of ancient Israel, but of the modern nation of Israel, and somehow believe that that could be without the providence and the hand of Almighty God. There is simply no other explanation. I am one who believes, and this is not a political view, this is deeply personal, and whether I'm in politics or not, I still hold this view. I held it when I was a teenager. I held it long before I ever got into politics, and 100 years from now, I will still hold it. In a different citizenship, no doubt, 100 years from now. And it's this belief that though we may break many of our promises to God, He never breaks His promises to us. Never, ever, ever. And for those of you who embrace and believe in the Bible, and I would assume that most of you in the RJC do, then I would have to say that I affirm the reality of Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. God says those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. That's either true or it is not. I believe it is true. Since 1973, when I was there for the first time, just a couple of months before the Yom Kippur War, I've been back dozens and dozens of times. I've lost track of just how many. I no longer keep a little running total because I was there twice this year, 3 times last year. I've literally escorted thousands of Americans to go to Israel because I want them to see it in person. I want them to understand not only the land and its people, but I want them to understand its history and its future, and for them to understand that if something happens to Israel and it loses its liberty and freedom, then the United States better buckle up because it's coming next to there. And that's what we have to consider every single day of our lives. The recent deal that was done with the Iranians is not a bad deal because it's a politically bad deal, not just a bad deal because it's a terrible idea for world peace. It's a terrible idea because it represents a direct threat to the United States, because in every situation, the Iranians have put the tip of their sword in Israel, but the full thrust of it will not be satisfied until it goes through the very heart of the United States of America. I sometimes hear people, even Republican candidates for presidents, who say things that I find just head-scratching. When they say, well, I think that there's possibility for peace in the Middle East, but only if Israel will sit down and try to work with the Palestinians. And I want to say, where have you been for the past 70 years? And I most certainly don't want to hear anybody say that the Israelis just need to give up some things and then they can have peace. I want to remind you that it is Israel that has consistently and repeatedly given up, given up, given up, and given up, and gotten nothing in return. Last June, Naftali Frankel, one of 3 young Israeli boys, was going home from school, was kidnapped at a bus stop, and was savagely murdered by Palestinian thugs. The day before they found his body, I was in the home of Naftali Frankel, just outside of Jerusalem, visiting with his absolutely amazing mother and father. I was there because I wanted to express to them not just my sympathy, but my support and my commitment that there cannot be ever a concession, that Israel would be expected to continue to give up not just land, but to give up their sons and daughters as long as the Palestinians continue to teach their children in school books that it is okay to kill Jews. That is not a concession that any nation should ever be willing to make. And no American president should ever put the pressure on Israel to give up land that God gave them the title deed to, whether it's the land of Israel, and that includes Judea and Samaria. And I don't want to hear a Secretary of State or a president give a lecture to Israel in the midst of them defending themselves against unwarranted, provocative rocket attacks and somehow say both sides need to settle down. Again, my wife and I were in Israel last August when Hamas was firing rockets out of Gaza, aiming specifically, intentionally for civilian targets because they wanted to bring as much carnage as was possible to the innocents of Israel. And my blood boiled because I was there when John Kerry gave a press conference in which he called for both sides to tamp down the violence. And I wanted to say, Mr. Kerry, maybe you should come and see what I'm seeing, because what I'm seeing is this. Hamas is putting children and unarmed women in front of their weaponry. The Israelis are putting their weaponry in front of their children and their women, trying to protect them. There is not an equivalency here. This is not sameness. This is not about both sides trying to somehow calm down. This is about one side trying to murder innocent people and another side trying to protect their families as they have a God-given right to do. I realize that for the past several years there has been, both on the Democratic and Republican side, the notion that we would be able to achieve Middle East peace by something called the two-state solution. I want to be on record, and I know that this would not even be something that would be agreeable to some of you, because there are many Republicans who think that the two-state solution is in fact a solution. I consider it no solution whatsoever. There cannot be two states holding for the same piece of real estate, especially when one of those states does not believe the other one even has a right to exist, much less exist peacefully. In fact, when I take groups to Israel and I take Americans, most of whom are there for the first time, I always get a Palestinian map, easily found in the old city. And I'll get the map out and I'll show some skeptical American who says, well, I think we should have a two-state solution. I said, really? Well, let's take a look and see what the Palestinians say about it. They said, why don't you find Israel on this map? And they look, and I said, well, where is it? And they said, well, it's not there. And I said, and that's the problem. If it were left to the Palestinians, it wouldn't be there. And that's why you can't have two governments wanting to own the same piece of real estate. So why don't we leave it in the hands of the government to whom it was originally given? And why don't we leave it into the hands of those who will protect not only the antiquities, but respect the religions, not only of the Jews, but also of the Muslims and of the Christians? I ask you, how many synagogues are being built in Saudi Arabia? I ask you today, how many churches are being allowed for construction in Tehran? And we know the answer, none. But today, as a Christian, I am free to go to Israel and to express and experience my own spiritual journey, as are Muslims, as are Jews. In no other country on this earth are religious traditions respected, appreciated, and protected like they are in Israel. And this is why Jerusalem can never be a divided city. It must be a unified city. And it's why that the next President of the United States, if his name is Mike Huckabee, will do something that presidents have hinted about and talked about but have never done because they're afraid it's an act of provocation. My friend, act of provocation is when terrorist groups continue to fire rockets into civilian territory. The United States needs to finally make the definitive statement of who it's taking sides with and move its embassy to Jerusalem and once and for all declare, we know who our peace partner in the Middle East is, and it is Israel. My many trips there have led me to this conclusion. If I had never believed the Bible before, I'd have to believe it from the visits, because I have seen the dry bones come to life, and I have seen the desert bloom. Places in Israel that in 1973 were rocky, barren, earthy nothingness are now lush with vegetation, lush with life and neighborhoods and families. And a nation that once was struggling is now stunningly alive, with some of the greatest levels of technology and advancement that can be found anywhere on planet Earth. This is nothing short of the miracle that I spoke of when I started here today. But this is not a miracle that we should take for granted. And if the United States ever has one strategic foreign policy decision to make, it needs to make the strategic foreign policy decision that it recognizes who its friends are and who its enemies are. And making a deal with the Iranians instead of standing with Israel is an inexplicable and absolutely unacceptable act of idiocy and insanity that we must reverse. And I don't want to see another American president ever put more pressure on Israel to stop building bedrooms for its growing families in Judea and Samaria than it's putting on Iran to build bombs that would be used against those children growing up in Judea and Samaria. There's only one other thing I'd like to ask you to do today. Vote for me. And if you'd like to give generously to my campaign, okay, I'll accept. And with that, Matt's going to come, and I think the remainder of my time I'll use to answer your questions. And I may regret this, but we'll go for it anyway. In politics, we call this Q&A, Matt, which everyone thinks means questions and answers. If you've ever run for office, you know that it really means questions and avoidance. So, Matt,
Governor,
fire
thank
away.
you. As I had mentioned in the early session, this is the result of the last couple weeks. We've been soliciting a whole bunch of questions from our members and our attendees, and we have curated them here. So let me take one of the ones that came up quite a bit, and it plays off of obviously a theme of what you were talking about before. The Democrats have played upon the fears of the Christian right by promoting the view that for many, support of Israel is based on a theological and a messianic foundation. Given your background, you're in a unique position as a minister to comment on this. How do you respond to those who say that support for Israel is based on a messianic foundation?
Well, it's a wonderful question, Matt, and I've been to Israel many times with Jewish friends when I was the only, I guess, goyim in the entire group. I was the oddity in the bunch. And I remember in one of the trips, it's been several years ago, and one of my Jewish friends with whom I'd made this trip, he said to me, he said, Mike, I don't understand something. Maybe you can help me figure this out. He said, evangelicals in the United States seem to be sometimes more supportive of Israel than American Jews. And I said, yes, I've noticed that. And he said, a lot of you have a greater fervor for the protection and the future of Israel than even many of the Jewish people do. He said, explain to me why. I said, it's really simple. I said, because you need to understand that as an evangelical, I embrace everything that you embrace in your faith. Your faith is the foundation of what I believe. And there wouldn't be a faith for me if it weren't for the faith that is built upon everything that is in the Jewish tradition. A person can be a Jew and not have any connection to a Christian. Perfectly possible. It is not at all possible for me to have a Christian faith and not have an absolute relationship with those who are my Jewish brothers. It is as simple as that.
But is your support for Israel based on more the shared values, along with obviously the theological, but also that support for Israel will necessitate the time for the coming of the Messiah?
No, I don't see it as a matter that I can have anything to do with end times. I have no idea. I knew a lot more about it when I was 18 than I do now. You know, the older we get, the less we seem to know with certain levels of surety about how God's going to let the world come to a conclusion. I don't know. But here's what I know. I know with all my heart that God is going to keep his promise to his people. And I believe he has made a covenant with his people, the Jews. And he will keep that covenant. And I don't want to do anything to, in any way, violate that covenant, stand in its way. But even if there were no covenant, even if there was no theological basis for me to have a relationship with Israel and the Jewish people, I would have a relationship and I would still have the same views because, as I said in the beginning, there is no country on this earth with whom we have a more organic relationship than we do with Israel. There's no country that more mirrors who we are as Americans. And there's frankly no country with whom we have a more vital strategic role in sharing intelligence and military opportunities, because we face the same ultimate enemy that is trying to kill you and trying to kill me, and that's radical Islamic jihadism. And if we do not understand that that is our enemy, we are not each other's enemies, we are each other's friends. But radical Islamic jihadism wants to kill all of us, starting with Israel and ending with the United States and the rest of Western civilization. And that's what's at stake for my kids, and more importantly, for my 5 grandkids.
I wanted to see if I could, because there was a couple questions about this, and it's an opportunity now to pivot on some domestic issues if I can. Obviously, as a governor of a deep South state, I think it would be very interesting to get your opinion and your thoughts on the state of race relations in this country.
I thought we were moving in many ways in a positive direction in race relations. And this will come as some surprise to some of you, but after the election of Barack Obama, who I did not vote for, and I campaigned vigorously for the person who beat me for the nomination in 2008, John McCain. But after the election, as a child who grew up in the 50s and the 60s and saw what real segregation did to people and saw what racism looked like through the Jim Crow laws and hated it even as a child, I was very optimistic and hopeful that the election of an African-American president would be a new day in America for race relations. To be honest with you, I thought that in my lifetime as a kid, I never thought I'd live to see that day. And there was a part of me as an American, forget that I was a Republican, I'm an American first. And I was proud to see that our country had moved past judging people by the color of their skin. And I thought that this is an opportunity for America to move forward. And I think Barack Obama could have been one of the great presidents of all time. But he chose not to be. Because what he chose to do was to bring a divisive spirit and attitude to the job of president, the likes of which I've never seen in my lifetime. And today, I think that we are as divided on race as we have been in decades. I do not believe it is a permanent division, and I believe it can be repaired. But it has to be repaired because we go back to the dream of Dr. King, that we will judge people not by the color of their skin, but by the character of their heart. And that ought to be the basis of all American relationships.
One of the other questions that came up quite a bit, as I think you can tell by the response you've gotten in the room, is that many in this room applaud your position on Israel and on security and the role of America on the international stage, but may disagree with you on social issues such as pro-choice and gay marriage. How would you convince people who are staunchly pro-choice or pro-gay marriage to vote for you?
I probably wouldn't. If those are the issues upon which you're going to select the president, and that's the determining factor, and you think that's the single most important factor in selecting a president, you're probably not going to vote for me. Because I am pro-life. I believe that every life has value and worth. I think every life has intrinsic value that we should never deny. I don't think that the captain of the football team is more valuable than the Down syndrome child. I believe they both have equal worth and value. I don't think that there's such a thing as a human being that's expendable or disposable. I think it's a dangerous place for us to go as a culture and a civilization when we begin to evaluate the worth and the viability, the value of one human over another. And so my pro-life position is not just about the baby in the womb. It's about the life of that individual throughout all of its existence, from the time it's conceived until the time God brings its life to a natural conclusion. I can't change on that. I'm not going to change on that. If that's the deciding point, I lose you. I understand that. But I'd like to think that even if you disagree with me on that issue, or the issue that I believe is another very divisive issue for some, and that's same-sex marriage. I believe that marriage is the union of one man, one woman, life partners, through which we create the next generation. And then we train that generation to be our replacements. If that's the sole issue by which you judge a candidate, again, I lose you. But on the other hand, if you look for a candidate who has those convictions because they're deeply held, and you know where I'm coming from, and you know that they're not political positions for me, and you'd rather have someone that you disagreed with, but someone that isn't going to change his mind every election cycle, like Barack Obama did when he said that his position on marriage was the same as mine in 2008, before he changed it 3.5 years later. So if you want consistency, I can give it to you. If you want someone who's going to change with the latest political poll, I'm quite certain you can look on the stage and you'll find somebody whose positions have shifted through the years and will shift for you for the right level of support. Look, I believe the next president has many jobs. One of them is to be the commander-in-chief, not the meteorologist-in-chief. Somebody who actually believes that the greatest threat to civilization is a beheading, not a sunburn, and I wish the president understood that. And someone who, if he goes to a foreign country, will not stand up at a podium and apologize for the prosperity and greatness of America, but will say, I will be happy to receive your thanks for the greatness and prosperity and generosity of America, because it is precisely that generosity and that prosperity that bailed out the butts of so many of people across this world, whether it was famine, earthquake, tsunami. It didn't matter. It was always the Americans who showed up to help and to generously give of themselves. And instead of apologizing for who we are, I think we ought to be proud of who we are and say we are happy to be a light to the world. We're not part of the darkness. We're part of the light.
We've got time for one last question. You had mentioned that without question you would move the embassy to Jerusalem.
Yes.
We have, as an organization, over the course of the years, had many candidates, and some who have even got elected president, who have come and said that, and it hasn't happened.
Right.
How can we know that you're to really get it done? And also, as president, how concerned are you about the international, regional and international ramifications? Obviously, that would be an extremely controversial move.
The excuse has always been offered that this would be provocative and it would evoke so many reactions. Let me just be blunt. The Iranians, and yes, even the Palestinians, already want to annihilate Israel, already hate Israel, already have nothing but contempt and disregard and disdain for Israel. Do we honestly think that there's anything we're going to do that will ameliorate those hatreds and fears and anxieties that have been directed toward the people of God for all these years? No. You wonder, well, how would we know you would be different? Because for me, this is not just a political issue. It is a deeply personal, a deeply spiritual. It's a matter of conviction. As I said, I didn't start building my relationship with Israel because I said, you know, someday I'm going to run for office. I might run for president. I've got to go up there and make all the Jewish Republicans really happy with me. I better say the right things. Maybe somebody can coach me on what I'm supposed to say and hand me some talking points. Folks, you've heard today what I believe. I back it up with 42 years of being an advocate of Israel. Long before I was in politics, I was taking the same stance for Israel. I have, I am, and I assure you that I will. And I thank you very, very much for your opportunity to be with you today. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor.